It's great to be joined again by former Ohio Republican Congressman Bob Ney, who represented Ohio's 18th congressional district from 1995 until 2006, when he resigned after pleading guilty to charges of conspiracy and making false statements in relation to the Jack Abramoff Indian lobbying scandal. Bob was sentenced to 30 months in prison, ultimately served 17. He's also the author of the book Sideswiped: Lessons Learned Courtesy of the Hitmen of Capitol Hill. It's so great to have you on. And, you and I have talked about some of the areas where, since your departure from the U.S. House of Representatives, you've started to differ from Republicans. Talk to us broadly about how you see this Republican primary that's playing out right now. Do you feel that your views are represented among the, I guess now it's around 15 candidates that remain?
Parts of them are scattered, David, across the candidates. I must say, I think this is one of the strangest elections probably in modern American history. It's going to be. But when you look at the crowd, most likely, I would have a lot of views that John Kasich would share, not union views, because I was a very pro-labor Republican, which, by the way, there were 50 of us that always supported prevailing wage, supported minimum wage increases. That element of the party seems to be gone. Most of us are gone from there. But Kasich does have some points of view, I think, that are balanced. Now, playing to the crowd, however, that's not going to get him anywhere, and it didn't the other night. I mean, in other words, he had to be honest, but with that crowd, it's not going to do well for him. Although, if you look at Trump, Trump in himself is not towing the complete right-wing line. He's staked out positions, immigration, for example, but on some other things like Russia and what to do with Russia, he hasn't staked out that right-wing line. Ben Carson, frankly, David, I can't follow where he's at. Honestly, I mean, I'm trying. This is not trying to slam him personally, but where does the appeal come from? I mean, so you have Trump and Carson at the top of the food chain, not the standard Cruz, Rubio, Rand Paul, Kasich, the office holders, but you've got these other two people, and I'll put Fiorina in there to an extent, that are on the outside. So I think that's dissatisfaction by a lot of Republicans with the current situation in the Congress. Now, that doesn't mean that it didn't go to the right enough. I think it means that they don't know where they want to go in that Congress. And a lot of that was due, obviously, to the horrible, horrific failure of leadership of John Boehner and the stale, same old Mitch McConnell. And a lot of Republicans feel that way. So it's not even breaking down anymore, David, into right or left, as much as it's breaking down to trying to follow where on earth some of these candidates really are.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with you that John Kasich has been the guy that I don't agree with him on everything. He's a Republican and I'm not, but he's the guy who to me seems the most connected to reality in terms of sort of pragmatic ideas, in terms of how you can govern. And I agree with you that I don't share his views when it comes to organized labor and unions. He just seemed to really not do well in the last debate. He was attempting to sort of aggressively insert himself in rebuttals, and it didn't go particularly well for him. And another thing people have emailed me about is whenever the camera catches Kasich when he's not speaking, he has these unfortunate sort of facial tics, and he looks sort of uncomfortable up there, and that some of the optics of Kasich probably aren't helping him. But I think Kasich, and although I don't agree with him on many issues, Rand Paul was also saying things with regard to the sort of efficacy of our foreign policy that were also resonating with me.
Well, and that's right. And they were being practical. I mean, look, for matters of disclosure, David, go back to 1994 when I ran, and I could actually name my five, by the way. I wouldn't repeat commerce twice like Ted Cruz. But we had, back in 1994, we're going to close the Department of Commerce. We're going to shut down the Department of Education. We're going to shut down HUD. We had our five, personas out there, the mantras that we had. Ted Cruz is still on that. Even with Republicans, that's stale old leadership. So, you're looking at this. Kasich gave, I think, a practical approach. But again, and by the way, I wanted to address the facial tics because I was asked on a show yesterday. I do radio every week. I've known John Kasich for years. He actually has done that for years, but now he's before a national audience. So it's kind of a habit he has. But if you don't know him, you're kind of like, is he nervous? What's up with that?
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
So I'm curious about your thoughts regarding the some of the ideas that have become prevalent among this Republican primary, ideas that may be with regard to climate change, ideas on social issues, etc. The Republican Party likes to say it's a big tent party. There's no litmus test for being in this party. So you have someone like Donald Trump who wants to raise taxes on the richest of all Americans. You have individual candidates with ideas that may not fit so obviously with the Republican platform. But at the same time, you have very, very extreme ideas on social issues. Is this a good thing for a Republican primary, or is this a problem in your mind?
I think it's a problem, but let's look at something. This fascinates me. Look, in the old days of Karl Rove, when you want to make sure your candidates win, you pull out God, guns, and gays.
Right.
Those are the three things you do. Now the gay issue is gone. I mean, even Trump and Bush, have addressed that. It's not for all the candidates, but the candidates that are still insistent on making this the engine that drives the Republican Party are sitting at the kiddie table. Lindsey Graham, you've got Rick Santorum, Huckabee, who wants to use National Guard to arrest everybody, including starting with the gays first. But that whole group, they're at the kiddie table. So it shows you there's some issues that are now gone for the most part. They still resonate a little bit, but they're kind of gone. But as far as the economic issues, et cetera, I think that the extreme thinking is just not going to work. They're going to have practical solutions how to get out of this debt problem. The other thing that has to be dropped, I think, because of the wide variety of independents that really choose presidents now, is the fact of trying to pretend that you can just be one monolithic party that just beats the living heck out of the other side. Somebody's got to admit that there has to be a hand given out, and some people have to work together, even as we did in an unbelievable way. When you look back at the Gingrich years, it looked like a honeymoon compared to the Boehner years with the White House. So I think there's got to be somebody that's got the guts to come out. Don't be so right wing that we just think we can do it our way. Because when we do that, we as a Republican Party come to the fight with a knife versus everybody else that has a gun.
What's your thought on some of the tax plans that have been presented by the candidates? And I'm thinking first and foremost of Ben Carson and Donald Trump. Ben Carson has this biblical tithe-based plan where everyone pays the same percentage. An analysis was done. It would explode the deficit. He's questioned about it in the CNBC debate, and he says, well, the analysis is bogus because the economy would do so well that we would make up for it. Donald Trump, similar idea. Analysis is done. It would add who knows how many hundreds of billion dollars to the deficit. He says, no, because the economy will expand so much, we'll make it up, which to me is such a cop-out answer because it says, no, we can't even do an analysis because my tax plan is so good. Is that a problem for you? Do you think that some of these tax plans fall apart when you get to that question?
It's a huge problem. One of the biggest frustrations I had, and I've watched all the debates because I report on them, was sitting there, having been in the room with John Kasich, with the doors closed, and Kasich pointing his finger at the Republicans and saying, "Hey, corporate welfare's got to go too." I wish John, would bring out those lines that he used at that time. There is a way to get through these things. There were 5 balanced budgets with Clinton and a Republican Congress. Those days are long gone. If we want to get extreme and do the gaga, tax relief, I'm going to lower your taxes for, quote, working people, but yet the top of the food chain really gets the tax breaks. People aren't dumb to that. They're going to see through it. So I'm very, very worried that there is not a substantive policy format for practically getting, in a practical way, getting out of this mess, David. There's got to be something. And I think it was lacking there.
Who do you think will ultimately be the Republican nominee?
Okay. First of all, Jeb Bush would have done better to have belched the ABCs and tap dance on stage for votes. He'd have got more votes than what he got. Pathetic. In fact, his people said, well, he's reignited. They need some therapy.
Right.
Bush is done. If his name wasn't Bush and he didn't have $100 million, he'd be at the kiddie table with Santorum and the rest of the crew. He's just finished. He doesn't want to be there. Now, getting off of Bush for a second, I think that, Rand Paul will not be in the final mix. I think the final mix, when I say final mix, in a few months will be Trump and Carson, Rubio and Cruz most likely will be the final mix. Now, does Cruz make it to the top? I don't know. I do the babysitter judgment on candidates. If you interviewed him, would you want him watching your kids? I mean, what do you think? So there's just something about Ted Cruz. He's just not going to come across.
Oh, there's something, all right.
Yeah, yeah. And if it was just right wing, then Rick Santorum would have been the nominee, not Mitt Romney. And I want to point that out. So I think the top three is going to boil down probably to Carson and Trump and Rubio is what I think. Maybe Cruz will still be hanging in there. I think we might have an open situation going into the convention even.
What I think is interesting about that is I agree with you. I don't think it'll be Cruz. And then when I sit back and think about Donald Trump and Ben Carson, I just can't imagine that ultimately they will be the nominees. And that leaves me with Marco Rubio, who has had 2 consecutive really strong debate performances. And although I think he sounds a little rehearsed and I think he certainly lacks experience, it has been a huge mistake. And I'm wondering if you agree to go after him for this personal credit card and financial thing, because he has such a great answer, which is, yeah, I'm not a multimillionaire like the other candidates. I'm a normal person. And I think it's a bad idea to attack him on that.
I remember Dennis Kucinich, who I served with, being attacked, and I was also attacked because we were the 2 Ohio members who had some credit card debt. We were attacked for it, and we actually won on that issue. We weren't wealthy enough as the rest to not have credit card debt. And you look at this and you think, where did people come from? And this attack on Rubio on the credit card, I mean, he's answered it. Jeb Bush has been going crazy on it. I think it helped him, actually. I think it was a pretty lame attack, and I think it helped him at the end of the day. I believe he's past that. But this is going to be fascinating. And it obviously, with Trump and Carson at the top, people want the, kind of the outsiders. Bernie Sanders, who I served with for 11 years, he's the inside outsider, if you know what I mean.
Right.
He's gotten popularity because I don't care if he's been there 40 years. Bernie Sanders is a guy that you look at and say, yeah, that guy's kind of outside that madness there in D.C. And so that's what's happened with Carson and Trump. Now, that lasts only so long when you really get down to a general election and you have to start talking about, facts. And that's where both Sanders and Clinton have had a long history. And they, and maybe that's a downside being in D.C., but it's also an upside of knowing when it really cuts to the chase in the general election of how do you get to specifics. So Carson and Trump have become, I think, a modern-day enigma in the Republican Party of 2 people that have the luxury of beating up the current Republican system.
All right. Bob Ney, former Ohio Republican. Always great to have you on.
Thank you, David.